Working the closing shift at Taco Bell had always given me the creeps. Being there alone late at night, cleaning up while the empty parking lot and darkened streets were so still. It created an eerie atmosphere, but I never imagined just how terrifying that restaurant could be after hours, until the night I realized I was being stalked there. It started out like any other closing shift. It was a Thursday night around 10 p.m. Things had been slow, so I went ahead and locked the front doors, even though we were still technically open for another hour. I just wanted to get a head start on cleaning things up and closing out the registers. As I swept the lobby, I glanced up and noticed a man standing outside the locked front doors. He was tall and skinny, wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled up over his head. Something about him gave me an uneasy feeling. Our eyes met for a brief moment before I quickly looked away. When I glanced back up a few minutes later, the man was gone. I tried to shrug it off as nothing, even though I knew I had locked that door. I was probably just being paranoid. I brought the registers into the back office to count down. As I sat there tallying up the money, the sound of footsteps outside the office doorway made me jump. I looked up, expecting to see my coworker, but no one was there. I shook my head, laughing at myself for being so jumpy. After finishing the registers, I did a quick walkthrough to lock up the back doors. As I went to lock the rear entrance by the dumpster, a shadow passed by the edge of my vision. I whipped around, but again, no one was there. An uneasy feeling started to build in the pit of my stomach. Finally, it was time to arm the security system and get out of there. As I walked through the dark lobby, the sensor lights clicked on, triggered by movement. I froze. Someone else was in here with me, heart pounding. I scanned the shadowy interior, but saw nothing. I moved slowly toward the front doors, clutching my keys tightly in my fist. As I entered the unlock code with a shaky hand, a loud bang came from close behind me, making me scream. I whipped around, eyes darting wildly, ready to fight. But the lobby was empty, hands trembling. I finally got the door unlocked and burst out into the night, gasping for air. The parking lot was deserted, except for my car. Nearly hyperventilating, I jumped inside and sped out of the parking lot, checking my rearview mirror compulsively. No one followed me, but I knew with absolute certainty now, someone had been in there with me, stalking me. Over the next week, I dreaded going back to close alone. But each night, nothing strange happened. No signs of an intruder, no creepy stalker. I started to feel ridiculous about that night. Maybe it was just my imagination running wild. But then, the following Thursday, I was closing again, tensely doing my usual routine. As I finished counting the registers in the office, movement outside the door made me freeze. The hint of a silhouette passed by. I sat petrified, listening intently. No more movement, no sounds. I forced myself to get up and check the lobby. I didn't see anyone, but I couldn't escape the prickly feeling on the back of my neck that told me I wasn't alone. I wanted desperately to run, but I still had to set the alarm and lock up. Taking a deep breath, I hurried towards the front doors, wanting to get this over with. But as I entered the code with trembling fingers, that horrifying bang sounded again, even closer this time. I screamed and hit the wrong buttons, panicking as the system beeped in error. Frantically punching codes, I kept imagining a dark figure approaching me from behind. Finally, the light turned green, and I heard the click indicating armed. I turned to run and came face to face with the hooded stalker himself. He reached for me, mouth twisted into a sick grin. Adrenaline exploded through me and I slammed my keys directly into his face. He howled in pain, hands flying up to his eyes. I sprinted outside into the safety of the night. The next day, I quit. As terrifying as it was being stalked by that hooded psychopath, nothing could make me go back to close there alone. I realized that empty Taco Bell after dark was the perfect place for a predator to hunt, and I refused to be anyone's prey ever again. The memories still paralyze me years later, and I've never eaten at Taco Bell since. It happened on a night much like tonight. I was alone in my apartment, curtains drawn, doors locked, just trying to relax after a long day. As I sank into the couch, eyes glued to some mindless show on TV, a sharp noise made me jump. Tap, tap, tap. I paused the TV and listened closely. Silence. I laughed at myself for being so jittery over a random sound. It was an old building. Noises happened. I was about to hit play when it happened again, louder this time. Tap, tap, tap. A cold feeling trickled down my neck. Someone was at the door. I looked through the peephole, but no one was there. Were they already gone, or were they hiding just out of sight? My pulse quickened. I double-checked the lock and chain just to be safe, then retreated back into the apartment. "You're being ridiculous," I muttered to myself. I took a few deep breaths to calm my nerves. As I exhaled, a floorboard creaked right behind me. I whirled around with a gasp. No one there. No more sounds followed, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. I roamed around, turning on more lights, constantly glancing over my shoulder, even though each room was empty. Finally, I sank onto my bed, exhausted from anxiety. As my eyelids grew heavy, I convinced myself I'd imagined the earlier sounds. Just sleep deprivation playing tricks, nothing more. I turned off the bedside lamp and nestled under the covers, ready to let sleep take me far away from this eerie night. As I drifted off, a deafening crash jolted me upright. Heart pounding, I stared wildly into the darkness. Had a window broken? Had an intruder gotten inside? I rushed to flick on the lights, but they wouldn't turn on. With a growing sense of dread, I realized the power had gone out. I wanted desperately to think it was just a faulty circuit breaker, but I couldn't ignore the sinister atmosphere that permeated the blacked-out apartment. It felt like unseen eyes were watching me from every corner. I blindly grabbed my phone and flipped on its flashlight, casting long shadows across the walls that seemed to stretch and contort into grotesque shapes. Cautiously, I tiptoed through the rooms, searching for the source of the earlier crash. In the living room, the TV lay smashed on the floor. But how? I knew no one had been in here. A violent gust of wind suddenly shook the building, making me jump again. The windows weren't open, but it almost felt like something was trying to get inside. Unsure what to do next, I stood paralyzed in place, ears straining, heart thudding. Then came the whisper, an unmistakable slithery whisper seeming to originate from directly behind me. "Let me in." I release a blood-curdling scream and drop my phone, the light disappearing as it clattered across the floor. Blind terror gripped me. I couldn't see a thing, but I could feel the malice, the pure evil that shared this dark space with me. I wanted desperately to wake up from this nightmare. Hot tears streamed down my face as I choked back sobs. Then came the horrible dragging sound, like nails scratching their way up the wall I was pinned against. It was coming closer, closer, until I could sense its faded breath on the back of my neck. Without thinking, I darted away from that area, nearly tripping as I rushed for where I thought my front door was located. I had to escape, but I couldn't orient myself without any light. All I could do was stumble around, waving my arms wildly in front of me until they made contact with something solid. The kitchen counter. I crept along its edge, heading to where the apartment exit should be, when suddenly my fingers dipped into something wet and sticky. What was that? I tentatively sniffed my hand and nearly vomited. It smelled like rotten meat. At that moment, the deafening crash came again right from the kitchen, the sound of glass bottles violently shattering. I recoiled in terror, slipping on the foul, mysterious liquid and crashing chin first into the tile floor. Dazed, I ran my hands across the smooth surface, hoping to find my phone again. That's when my heart stopped. Lying there inches from my face was a hand. A severed, rotting hand, fingers curled as if beckoning me to come closer. I screamed and scrambled backward. I had to get out. This couldn't be real. I staggered to my feet and felt my way to the front door. To my immense relief, it opened and I burst out into the hallway, flooding my vision with light. Gasping, shaking, I collapsed against the wall and broke down in tears. Neighbors started peeking out, muttering in confusion at the raving, hysterical woman weeping on the floor. As I tried to recount my story, I gazed back into my still dark apartment. Through the sliver of space, I thought I saw a pair of glowing eyes peering out at me, before a swirl of shadows swallowed them from view. I was driving back from Kentucky to Illinois once. I would frequently make long drives for work, and I would drive at all hours of the night. On this day, I was somewhere in northern Kentucky about 3 hours into my drive, which would be an all-nighter. It was about 1:00 a.m., and I had to take a detour due to construction on a major road. I was annoyed because this would delay me, but I kept driving. It took me on a little highway and then to a small town. The road was very quiet, and as I passed through the little town, I noticed a car on the side of the road. I figured it was, so I slowed down a little bit. I wasn't speeding, but that's just a reaction I tend to have. As I got closer, I saw that it was not a cop car, but just a regular-looking car. When I passed by the car, it pulled out and began to follow me. I didn't know why the car would follow me, but I just kept driving as best I could. After about 10 minutes of driving, the car began to speed up and get closer to me. I started to get annoyed. He pulled out behind me and was now tailing me. I pulled over to the side of the road to let it pass by, but instead the car pulled over as well. I was kind of mad, so I thought I would ask the driver what his deal was. I'm 6'3" and weigh about 210 pounds, so I figured I could take him whoever he was. I stalked my car and got out. I stood next to my car, facing the car behind me. The door started to open, and then it shut. The car then took off and started driving straight for me. I couldn't believe my eyes. I quickly jumped on the hood of my own car. I got out of the way with about 1 second to spare as his car whizzed by me. It also came about a foot from scraping my car. I immediately got back in my car, made a U-turn, and started driving the opposite direction. The car kept going the other way down the road. After a minute or so, I pulled over and took out my phone to call the police, but I had no signal. I ended up driving back to the freeway I had been on earlier, where I had serviced and was able to report the incident. I also found another route to take home. It took me an extra hour, but I was able to make it home safe. That was one of the scariest moments of my life. It was a late Thursday night, and I was working the closing shift at the grocery store, just as I did every week. As usual, the store was pretty empty by 10 p.m., and I was starting to clean up and get things ready for the next day. I was used to working alone at night, but something about this particular evening gave me an uneasy feeling. I tried to shake it off as I wheeled my cleaning cart down the aisles, tidying up stray pans that customers had abandoned. The store was eerily quiet, except for the occasional humming of the refrigerators. As I turned down the cereal aisle, a box of cornflakes suddenly fell off the shelf, startling me. I laughed at myself for being so jumpy and placed the box back on the shelf. "Get a grip. It's just your imagination," I muttered. But the uneasy feeling persisted. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself glancing nervously down each aisle as I walked past. Finally, it was time to lock up. I did a final sweep of the store and verified the security cameras and alarm system were on. As I went to exit, the motion sensor on the door didn't go off. I waved my arms, but nothing. With the doors locked for the night, I'd have to call the manager to let me out once I was done. As I turned to go finish closing up, a loud crash rang out from somewhere in the rear of the store. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. "Hello," I called out shakily. Silence followed, slowly and cautiously. I inched my way towards the back, peering down each aisle as I grasped my cleaning spray bottle tightly. As I neared the dairy section, I smelled an intensely foul, rotten odor. I gagged and covered my nose. The rancid smell led me towards the large walk-in refrigerator. The door was ever so slightly ajar, Another crash sounded from inside, followed by a sickening, slick, squelching noise that turned my stomach. Nearly paralyzed by fear, I reached out a trembling hand and slowly pulled the heavy door open. A wave of putrid air rushed out as I looked inside. What I saw will haunt me forever. Here is one possible chilling ending for the grocery store horror story. As the door creaked open, the foul smell overwhelmed me. I choked back vomit, peering into the dimly lit refrigerator. There, lying on the floor in a puddle of dark ooze, was a mutilated body. It was one of the store managers, though I could barely recognize her through the gore. Her eyes stared vacantly up at the ceiling, a jagged gash torn across her throat. Crimson footprints led away from the body, trailing blood down the aisles of milk and eggs. She must have stumbled in here after being attacked, desperately trying to hide. A creaking sound made me whip around. The door to the freezer room swung slowly open. A tall, shadowy figure stepped out, dripping with blood. In its hands it carried a long, blood-stained knife. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure lunged towards me, impossibly fast. I felt the knife slash across my chest as I turned and ran. Stumbling through the dark store, I screamed for help. My attacker's footsteps pounded after me. I made it to the front of the store, pounding the doors, begging to be let out. The glass doors rattled but wouldn't budge. Footsteps closed in behind me as I turned to face my fate. The security alarm finally began blaring. My screams echoed through the empty store as the knife slashed again and again. The floor became slick with blood. Then, everything went black. It was well past midnight when I finally left my friend's house after a late night of video games and hanging out. Now I just had to make the 45-minute drive home through winding country roads. I said goodbye, got in my car, and headed off into the darkness. I always loved night drives. There was something so peaceful about the empty roads with just my headlights cutting through the blackness. I rolled the windows down to feel the cool night air whipping around me. About 15 minutes into the drive, I realized I was running low on gas. Of course, being out here in farm country, there weren't exactly many 24-hour stations to stop at. I'd just have to keep an eye out for one and hope I came across something soon. After a few more miles, my gas lights started blinking. I was close to empty. My heart sank as I squinted into the distance, desperately hoping to spot a lit-up station. Finally, I came across an old rundown gas station on the side of the highway. It didn't look very inviting, but it was likely my only option out here. I pulled up next to the single ancient pump and shut my engine off. The place was deserted, not a soul around. My unease grew. I pumped my gas as quickly as I could, wanting nothing more than to get back on the open road. Just as I was about to climb back into my car, the overhead lights at the station suddenly clicked off, plunging me into sheer darkness. I froze in place, unsure what to do next. Had the power gone out? Or did someone intentionally turn the lights off? I stood paralyzed in confusion when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching gravel nearby. My pulse pounded in my ears. I leapt back into my car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. Fumbling to start the ignition, I kept hearing the footsteps draw steadily closer. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I floored it back onto the road, my heart racing. I let out a huge sigh of relief once the glow of the taillights faded into the distance. I tried to calm my rattled nerves and focus on just getting home safely. About 10 miles down the highway, blue and red flashing lights appeared in my rearview mirror. A police cruiser was pursuing me with its siren blaring. I pulled over, confused why I was getting pulled over, but also a bit relieved to see another human. The gruff officer accused me of skipping out on paying for gas. I explained it was a mistake. The lights had shut off, and I got scared when I heard noises. But the cop was having none of it. He ordered me out of the car to perform a sobriety test. I nervously got out and followed his instructions, walking the line heel to toe. Apparently, I failed the test, so he barked at me to put my hands on the hood and proceeded to pat me down. Finding nothing, he then reached into my pockets, pulling out a small plastic bag. Well, what do we have here? He asked snidely. I looked in shock as he held up a bag of white powder, but it wasn't mine. He slapped cuffs on me and shoved me into the back of the cruiser, reading me my rights. I pleaded desperately that I'd been set up, but he just ignored me. We pulled into a police station where he fingerprinted me and led me straight to a holding cell, saying I could explain everything to the judge in the morning. But I knew with that bogus evidence, no one would believe me. I sat there in that cold, empty cell all night, terrified of what awaited me in court. Just a few hours ago, I had been excited for a simple drive under the stars. Now I found myself trapped in the twisted darkness of this night gone horribly wrong.